Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another Recent Reads on Sunday, my weekly, more or less, video in which I talk about the books that I finished the previous week and still working on, started, stuff like that. You know how it goes. We'll start with the books that I finished. And the first one, Black History Month. It was my first read for Black History Month. Toni Morrison, Beloved, first published in 1987. This was a buddy read with Heidi from My Reading Life, and I will leave a link to her channel down below. She already reviewed the book, so you can check out her review. We basically agree, so I could also just refer to her review. We both thought it was a really, really good book, and there were one or two things that for both of us didn't work and were the same things. Yeah, twinning. But anyway, Beloved is set in, it opens, I should say, in the 1870s. So after slavery, at least officially. And our main character is a woman in her maybe 40s, Sethe, S-E-T-H-E. And her daughter Denver, who is 18. And very quickly we become aware of the fact that Sethe has been enslaved for most of her life, and that something happened to another daughter of her, whom she calls Beloved. She also has two sons, but they already left when they were 14 or 13, and they are not really talked about a lot anymore in the book. So it's centering on Sethe, Denver, the daughter, and the dead daughter, Beloved. And I mean, I'm sure you've heard about the story, but for those of you who are not familiar or aware of the story, I'm not going to give spoilers. So I'm not going to tell you what happened to Beloved, other than that she is dead. And the house is haunted, and there's also Paul, whom Sethe knew when they were both enslaved, and the relationship of those two. And then a young woman comes into the house, and that doesn't go well, to say the least. So that's roughly the story. The timeline switches back and forth between the 1870s back to the time when Sethe was still enslaved, when she was younger, what happened to her, and that the way that Toni Morrison deals with this topic of what it really means to be a slave is just brilliantly done and harrowing and gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching. It's unbelievable. Toni Morrison focuses, of course, on the woman, even though we get a little bit of a background story of Paul and some other men who also had been enslaved, and their experience wasn't any better. But the focus is still on the woman and what it means to be a slave and become a mother. So that is just brilliant. The language is incredible. The way that Toni Morrison can write is just mind-boggling. So that is all fantastic. The same thing that Heidi mentioned in her review, what I couldn't really, it just didn't work for me, was the whole more magical realism thing, the haunting, that it's just not my jam. I just don't like it. It doesn't work for me. And there were a couple of chapters that were kind of a stream of consciousness in the heads of various protagonists. I have to say most of the book is written in third person omniscient, but she dabs into certain characters' minds, and she did so in 3 or 4 longer chapters, and that didn't work for me either, because I thought it was a real break in style, and I didn't understand why. It didn't make sense to me. And there were more little things that I thought the story of the two male children, the brothers, they just vanished, and that was a bit weird. So it was in the end not a 5-star read. That's what I'm getting at, I think, but it is a brilliant book. It is absolutely a brilliant book. So if you haven't read it, it was my second success story with Toni Morrison, so my hopes are up, and I will be reading The Bluest Eye next, probably in April, together with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. Beloved. The next book for Black History Month was also the February pick for the Book Naturalist Book Club, a non-fiction book by Pauline. Alexis Pauline Gums, Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals. That's a collection of essays, and I think it was published in about 2 years ago, maybe. 2020. I'm just checking. I mean, I don't like this, very stark kind of paper. I don't like the feel of the book, so that didn't help. But it's an interesting essay collection because it's Alexis Pauline Gums is a poet and like a lay scientist, if you will. She's not working as a scientist, but she's interested in marine mammals, especially in whales and dolphins. And the chapters are titled Breathing, Cooperation, and then she looks at certain behaviors of dolphins in particular, and sometimes whales, and she draws comparisons with human beings and what we can learn. I thought some of the essays were absolutely brilliant, language-wise, but also the insight and the way she Gums takes the life of these mammals and tells us humans something to learn or to reflect about. And other essays were a bit woo-woo for me, and that never works. So it was a bit of a mixed bag, but as a pick for the Book Naturalist Book Club, I thought it was brilliant because it was so different. I've never read anything quite like this. So even though it might not have worked, everything, not every essay, I still feel that this is a book that you should pick up if you're interested in that, intersection between queer Black feminism in general, the life of human beings, and the life of their cousins, the marine mammals. So yes, for this pick, even though, like I said, it did not all of them worked for me. The same goes for the next book that I read, also for Black History Month, but it was my pick for Invisible Cities for February. You know about that project where the organizers pick 2 countries each month, and then you read a book, and you can also, listen to music, watch films. But I'm just reading the books. And February is Guyana and Uganda. I haven't read the Uganda book yet. We'll probably start maybe next week, but I did read Grace Nichols' poetry collection, The Fat Black Woman's Poems, published in the 1980s. I have never heard of Grace Nichols. She was born in 1950 in Georgetown in Guyana, and she moved to the city, and she has been living in the UK since I think 1977, certainly since the 1980s. So when she was in her late 20s, early 30s, she has been living in the UK ever since. So this book was written, this poetry collection was written and published when she was already living in the UK, just to give you some, context. But still, it's about, first of all, fat Black women. I love that title. And again, some of the poems I thought were just absolutely brilliant. The turn of phrase, sometimes a poem, I was reading the beginning of a poem and it was okay, and then she has a turn of phrase and I was like, whoa. And then I read the poem again and I thought it was brilliant. Others were like, yeah, maybe I just didn't get them. I mean, I'm not a big poetry reader. You know that if you follow my channel. So But it's a tiny collection in terms of pages. But as always with poetry collection, that doesn't mean that you can read it quickly. At least I can't. So it took me, I think, a week to read it. I read like 2 poems or 3 poems each day, and then I went back and forth and reread poems. But I think, to give it a try, it's certainly worthwhile, because again, like with Undrowned, it's quite different. It's a different experience, at least for me. And it's expressive poems. They are not difficult to get in a certain way. I hate it, when I feel so stupid that I read a poem like 4 lines and I have no idea what the poem is about. These are not that. So they might not all work for you, but I think it's worth giving them a try. And the last book I finished, that sounds like a lot, but most of them are very tiny books. Like this one is a short story collection, 13 Months of Sunrise by Rania Mamoun, translated from the Arabic by Elizabeth Jaquette, published originally in the Arabic in 2009 and in the English translation in 2019. This was the pick for another book club that is running all year, the Read Around the World book club, run by Mel from, not Mel's Bookland Adventures anymore, but Melanie Martin. Leave a link to her channel, of course, down below, where we read one work of fiction or non-fiction written by a woman from a different country. And the February pick was Sudan. So Rania Mamoun is from Sudan. This is her debut collection. It's about 13 or some stories. So the stories, as you can tell from the length of the whole book, are quite short. And again, some of them, I think maybe 2 or 3 of them I thought were absolutely fantastic, like the title story. One of the, I think it's even the first story, is called 13 Months of Sunrise. I thought was a fantastic story. And others were okay, but didn't blow me away. So the collection as a whole, I would say, was good, but didn't blow me away. But then again, I rarely ever read short story collections that have, more than 3 stories and they all blow me away. But it, again, like with the 2 previous books, it's a completely different world that we are entering. And I'm also have to say, again, like with the poetry collection, I know almost nothing about Sudan and the life there. I think this was probably the first book from that country that I read. So some of it might also didn't resonate because I just didn't know enough. So I think this is one of the books that I'm planning on, reading more about the country and then maybe revisiting. Certainly the ones that I felt didn't quite work for me. But it's, again, absolutely worth a try. And thank you, Mel, for finding this collection. I probably would have never, ever read this. Would have never heard of it if you hadn't picked it for the Read Around the World book club. And I'm like waving with the book. So those were the 4 books that I finished. And I'm not going to talk about that one book that is still, carried over month after month, about the heroines, but I'm just talking about the books that I started. And the first one is a buddy read with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, historical fiction, Margaret Drabble, The Red Queen, published in 2004. This is on my 1001 women list, so there's 1001 books by women, and it's also on Sandy's list because she is doing the 1001 books before you have to read before you die, and she combined various lists, and it's on her list as well. So we decided to read it together, and buddy reads up. It's fun. We are now halfway through. Like I said, it's historical fiction, and of course Margaret Drabble a UK author, by the way, and you might know her sister, is Buddyead, and that they don't really get along, but that's another story. And this was maybe her 10th book or something. And it's set in, at least the first part is set in Korea in the mid-18th century, 1700s, the mid-1700s. And the Red Queen is a princess, a Korean princess, who is married to the heir of the throne when she's 9 years old. And she tells her story herself after her death. She had died in her 80s, but we are now, in the 21st, 20th century, and she tells her story, and she looks back at her life. And the second part we are just about to start reading is from the point of view of a Western researcher, Barbara Halliwell. But I don't know yet how that works. I'm certainly liking it. It's an easy read, even though there's quite some violence involved in that life of hers and her princely husband, who had mental health issues. And by the way, they are real persons. So the princess and her husband and the people like the king, they actually lived during that time. It's always a bit difficult, I feel, that if you have this kind of historical fiction where you look at a culture that is so completely different and you actually inhabit that person's mind, because I always have, doubts whether you can actually really do that and whether it's not just the Western look, how we think that this princess felt. But I will talk about this more when I've finished it. I already talked way too much about this one. The next one is also a buddy read, nonfiction, and it's a buddy read together with Kim from Middle of the Book March, and again Heidi from My Reading Life. And we are reading The Barbizon, the New York Hotel That Set Women Free by Paulina Bren, published last year. This is also on my list, the 1001 books by and about women. And it's about this hotel that was built in the 1920s and was exclusively for women. Men weren't allowed beyond the lobby. And a lot of famous women stayed there in New York, by the way, when they wanted to make a living or a life or career in New York, but also tons and tons of, non-famous women like you and me who wanted to work as a secretary or wanted to make it as an artist. But from the famous women, Sylvia Plath stayed there, Meg Woolitzer stayed there, and it had been a hotel for women for long, and then it turned unisex, so also women and men, and then in 2004 or something it was converted into luxurious condominiums. And we are now the first 4 chapters, so we are in we're just reaching the 1950s. And to accompany this, I started a book set in New York in the 1940s, or at least the start of it, and that's Elizabeth Gilbert's novel City of Girls, about showgirls in the 1940s and 50s. And I thought I'd had this book for the longest time on my TBR, I think 2 years probably, and I thought this would be a good companion book, because it talks about not the Barbizon in particular, but it talks about the same era. So, for instance, the secretarial school, the Katie Gibbs school, is mentioned in this book and also in the Barbizon. So, and I'm not that far in, just a third. Anyway, so these are the books that I've read and that I've started. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I'm looking very much forward to your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one, which probably, by the way, public service announcement, will be next Sunday. I don't think I will have the time to film a video on Wednesday or for Wednesday. So sorry about that. But anyway, I'll see you soon in the next one, probably next Sunday.